As trainers, you need to make sure that you keep the members motivated. This session can seem a little repetitive, but it is unbelievably good at what it does. The sprints, followed by the exercises, mean that the members' blood systems are moving from upper body to lower body. You're locking up the core when they're trying to recover. Constantly telling the members this, constantly telling them what you can do to improve, or what this is doing to improve their fitness. So one element, warm-up. We're looking for consistency and continuity through every session. So we're trying to get the same warm-up at every location, at every session. And this gives the members an opportunity to learn the warm-up, to do it each week, to get to know each other, and they get 5 or 10 minutes to talk to each other before we then move into the dynamic session. So the layout of the warm-up is 12 steps wide, 30 steps long. And every 5 steps I put down a cone. So then the actual warm-up, we do a very simple run, a dynamic stretch and an isometric stretch. So we jog through the grid and then round the edge and back in at 50%. Then you go through a dynamic stretch. So for example, a side squat where you're going sideways, deep squat, a couple of steps, squat again. Then you come back in, and then we do a hamstring stretch, which is the isometric one. So just bouncing into a hamstring and maybe accelerating off. And then the other leg, and so on. Then we come back in. So you've done your run, you've done your dynamic stretch, you've done your isometric. When you get back in, we then go back into a run, but we build it from 50% sprint to a 60% sprint. Round the edge, jog gently in. When you get in, a new dynamic stretch. So this one could be facing sideways, twisting, bouncing. And then we come back in, a new isometric stretch. So this one might be a quad stretch followed by a small acceleration, and then the other leg. Then you come back in, you go back into your run. So you're now 80%, so beg your pardon, 70% sprint. We need a dynamic exercise, so maybe a walking lunge with a stretch. So first off, just stretching the hips each side, and then maybe you go into a lunge with a twist, so lunging and rotating. And then further forward, you're going lunge and lift. Back in, another isometric exercise. So this time you might do, not entirely isometric, but maybe a high kick. So just stretching the hamstrings off and kicking back to get the hip flexors, and so on. Around the edge, back in, we're now into 80%. See, 80% sprint through, new dynamic stretch. This time maybe side squats the other way, or twisting the other way, or changing directions. Back in, new isometric exercise. So this is high knee over a hurdle, for example. A couple of steps other leg. So just trying, not necessarily isometric, but just taking it a bit more gently. Come back in, 90% sprint. Back in. This time another dynamic stretch. So this time maybe changing direction. So I'm explosive one way, explosive the other. Trying to really get the energy up for the group now. Trying to maybe push them so they can't talk quite so much. Back in, another isometric exercise. This one could be, again, actually we'll go back into a sprint. So build the sprint up to 100% sprints here, and then finish with the last rotational exercise, and so on. So you really need to get the whole body working, building in intensity, 3 or 4 sprints at the end. This whole warm-up should last about 12 minutes every single time. Then we come off, we circle the group up, we dynamic exercise, so just rotating the hips and twisting the upper body, getting low. And as you're doing that, you then come up and ask everyone to go around their names, so shouting their names out, so even the new people get to know each other. And then we go into a very brief description of this week's session, and I'll be explaining each of those coming forward. This is one of the original OE sessions. In fact, this is so original that your parents would have done this training session at school or at the sports club or in the army. In fact, your grandparents would have done it. This is one of those true classic fitness training sessions that just builds and builds and builds. This was how we developed this with a school teacher, and it's the kind of session that we know works, know delivers. So here's the Hammond set, 10 meters and 30 meters. You split into 2 groups. The front group are doing the sprints, the back group are doing press-ups. You want to try and motivate the back group to do 25 press-ups per rep rather. So front line, you're going to be sprinting forwards out to the first cone and then backwards in. Imagine the referee's called his whistle. You're trying to sprint backwards as fast as you can. There and back 4 times. Ready, go! There and back 4 times. So that's brilliant. George at the back here is trying to hit 25. Once they've done 4 reps, guys, we'll pretend you've done 4 reps. Stop there, Danny. George would pop up and do 4 reps. That's 1 set. We do that 4 times. This is proper old school fitness training. This is the sort of fitness training that the members' fathers and grandparents would have done at school. So really good, fun, old school style fitness. Then we go into the 30-meter distance. So just for continuity, we'll have Danny and Jules up again. This time you're working with the 30-meter cones, which are the 2 pairs on either side, there and back 3 times. Maze at the back here, he's going to be doing sit-ups. No, running forwards out and forwards back. And they'll sprint there and back 3 times, not 4 times. And you need to be talking to the members here about why we're doing this, trying to give them validate the reason why they're out here. And the point is that when they get back, they'll be moving into sit-ups, which is locking up this core system so they can't recover as quickly. Okay, forwards on the line, go! And George is into sit-ups. So they would go 30 meters here, turn, back in hard. And once they get back in, that's 1, they're doing it 3 times, okay? And once they've done it 3 times, they swap it over, George does 3 sprints. They do that package, again, 4 sets of 3 reps. Okay, so session number 16, rugby cardiolactic set. This is I think one of the best sets that we have. You split the group into 2 lines. I tend to call them forwards and backs. So forwards are this line, or George's line, and backs are facing them, eyeballing them, beginning to strike up a bit of competitiveness. So George's line, the forwards, I'm going to shout a few instructions to him. So I either shout left or right, so he can run left or right, or I shout backwards, in which case he runs backwards. Sprint is the end of the warm-up grid, that's the 30-meter cone, and back in, hard as he can. Or push, in which case he drops low and pushes the partner back 2 cones. I'll also shout down, which is just getting down and back up. The whole idea with this is to get the intensity as high as you possibly can. So as fewer left, rights and backs as you can, lots of sprints, lots of pushes. I do 2 pushes, 2 sprints. So George, are you ready? Sprint! So here he's sprinting hard as he can to the end of the warm-up grid. It's good, back in hard, Maisie. And you've got a whole line of people hopefully doing this. As soon as you get in, down, up, push. Hits the ground, pops up, pushes his partner back 2 cones. That's good. Back in fast, George. Danny's talking to him, telling him about turn and sprint, George, turn and sprint. So you see it's really high intensity, hits the cardio, hits the lactic, testing him. Really good reflection of sports training, really good reflection of rugby training. Down, up, push, last push he's going to be doing. Down, up, hit and drive, George. Come on, working the legs hard as you can, back in fast. And as you can see, it's exhausting. At this point, we swap it over, get Danny to tap him on the back and tell him how well he's done, and swap it over, other person works. So this is Hammond set 50 and 70. So here we've just increasing the length. The Hammond set we did earlier in the session, which was the 10 and 30. Longer distances, less reps on the distances, but still 4 sets. So front line up, we'll get Danny and Jules up on the front here, and they're going to go to the 50-meter line and back in as hard as they can 2 times, fast as they physically can. George at the back here, he's going to go into a new core exercise. We're going to go abdo bike. So he's lying on his back, hands to ears, opposite elbow, opposite knee. They're going to run, as I said a moment ago, to the 50-meter line and back in twice. Forwards, go! We'll call it the white cone, boys. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Yeah, there you are. Okay, and back in hard. So they would come back in and then they turn around and they go back out again. So they do it twice. He's just doing core. Again, locking up the abdominals, not letting the body recover. You would go again, boys, but for this session, we're not going to do that. So that's the 50 done. Now on to the 70. So just because the others are exhausted, we'll get George up here. Now on the 70, The people who would be doing the core exercises don't do any core exercises at all. They simply are there to motivate and encourage the player who's running at the front. So George, you're sprinting as hard as you can to the 70. We'll call that the edge of the cricket box and back in. You guys are just going to stand there and motivate him. Ready, go! It's good. Telling him how well he's doing, how good he's looking, how strong he's working. Impressive sprinting, turns, comes in as hard as he can. He just does 1 rep, not 2. And we do 4 sets of 1 rep. Brilliant, George. Come through the line hard as you can. And as soon as he gets through the line, this line would then go. So we've come to the end of the session. We're looking to do a cool down or a stretch. A cool down, you might want to do a reverse shuttle run, so you go 100% to the longest cone and then decrease in energy as you come down. Then we're at about 55 minutes of the session. We've got a 5-minute stretch. Frankly, it doesn't have to be that good. You can explain to the members while you're stretching that actually isometric stretches are best done when their muscles are cold. I tend to just do, particularly in the winter when the ground's wet and cold, I do a quick salutation to the sun, or slow salutation to the sun, with a few extra stretches pushed in. You can do any stretch you like, but it needn't be more than about 5 minutes. As I'm going through it, I'll go through it now, but as I'm going through it, I also talk to the members about events coming up and about various things that have been good about the session, that sort of thing. So I tend to ask them to legs wide, roll forward, forehead touches the grass. Obviously you can't get anywhere near the grass, especially if you're as inflexible as I am. Then hands hit the ground, feet go back, hips go high, chin goes low. Stretch that and hold that for longer than I'm going to do it, but not too long. Then hips go high, chin high. That's good. Then I go hips high again and just walk it back until I'm hanging again between the legs. Then I look to go wide and stretch an adductor out. And if you can push them low on that one, even better. If they're struggling with this, on one knee, leg out to the side. Then I come into the middle and the other side. All the time I'm talking to them about events coming up, what's going on at training, who's done particularly well during the session. And maybe I'll do a glute stretch as well, so bring the knee across to one hand and just drop into a glute stretch. Then the other leg, and so on. After I've done both of those, I might look into an adductor stretch, so into one kneeling side, push the hip forward, kneeling side, hand high, and rotate away from that back leg. And again, holding for 30 seconds or so. While I'm in this position, I might go into a hamstring stretch. So that's pretty much it. Maybe finishing with a quad stretch. And I always end the sessions with getting the members as a whole group to face the sun, put their hands on the back of the head, shut the eyes, 3 or 4 long, slow, mindful breaths, just trying to bring them back into the moment, trying to take the energy, the heart rate down a bit. And then we stop if we can get them to clap, and then head home. So hopefully it's feeling really positive at the end of the session.